Okay, we're picking up this week. We're going to try to quickly close out the end of vaYiqra chapter 21. We'll start at 22. So I'm going to go back and read my translation of 21 because that'll help us dive into the next verse. My translation of 21 is, and every man who has a defect in him from the seed of Aaron, the Cohen, will not come near to the fire offering of Yahweh within him. He will not come near the sacrifice. Of course, an idiom was used there, but the translation is good. So let's begin with 22. Bread God, his holy things, the holies, and from the holies he eat. All right, so literally it's lachem, which means bread, but it's not being used here of bread. Then it says Elohiv, so it's the bread of his God. And at this point, if you guys recall what we've learned already, you should know that that's the sacrifices. God does not eat bread. He doesn't eat human food. We do not make sacrifices for him to nibble on. We don't do that. So when it says the bread of his God, it's talking about the sacrifices. That's just an idiomatic way of saying it. But then it says mi kadshe, which of course your root word there is kodosh, kadosh. Kodesh would be the more common way of remembering that word. And it's something that is holy. And for it to be holy biblically, it has to be set apart, set aside, apart and aside for something very specific. And being biblical, it would be set aside for the use uh, in the service of God. That would be holy. So let's say you're a rabbi and all you do is serve God's people by teaching on Shabbat and on the feasts, and you maybe listen to, counsel the people that are in your congregation, stuff like that. If that's the only job that you have, then you are a holy rabbi because you're set aside for that purpose and that purpose only. And then, so the things that are used for uh, the the work of God in other terms. For instance, there's a table. You can't see it in the shot, but it's essentially in front of me. And on that table, we perform kiddush. We have the wine and the bread and the candles and all that kind of stuff because it's set aside for that purpose. We don't use that table for any other thing. We don't use the wine container or the wine glass or the candle labra thingy. We don't use those for anything but the Shabbat, the use of God, right? So that is what makes that table and the instruments on it holy. Uh, and then it says, the word is mi kadshe, which is Kodesh. And then it says ha kodashim. So that's from Kodesh. So you go first, it's the singular version, and now it's the plural version. So this is holies. Uh, and the reason why that's done, there's several. The most common is that there is an emphasis being made. Every once in a while, we split those up in English, and we'll say holy. The singular will be found in one sentence, and then the plural will be found in the second sentence. That's never actually correct. But for you to understand what's being said in Hebrew through the mindset of English, we sometimes have to do that because there's just no way to really get the point across. But in the biblical period, reading this passage, the first word, Kodesh, would have been said, say, at the level I'm speaking now, where HaKodeshim would be pronounced much louder. Kodesh, HaKodeshim, right? Because it's to add emphasis. In the biblical period, there were no explanation points, and there were no grammar's in my head. I can't think of the right word. Punctuation. The punctuation happened vocally, either by repeating words or saying words that mean exactly the same thing as the previous word. That's another way to do it, a more common way to do it. And then the most common way when you're reading is to raise your voice. So anyway, something lost on most Jews today. You know, I don't even know that they do that in the synagogues anymore. I'm sure some of them probably do, but it's not a real common thing anymore. So then it says Umin ha kadashim. Here we go with a third time saying this, and yes, it would have been even louder than the one before. So this is holy in the plural again, and this is yochel, and that's to consume food. That's to eat food. Eat, E-A-T. That's a word we would use normally. So here's my translation. From the holy he will eat the sacrifices, the bread of his God, the sacrifices. From the holy and the most holy. From the holy and the most holy. Even Ezra correctly wrote that while a blemished Cohen was not allowed to make sacrifices, he was allowed to eat from them. And the point being that just because somebody has a blemish does not mean that they stop being a Cohen. The only thing they're not allowed to do with this blemish, and not something they were born with, but something that comes along later, if you recall, is that they're not allowed to go near the fire and they're not allowed to make the sacrifices, but they are allowed to do all other duties of a Cohen. So that is including eating of the food, because otherwise they would starve. That God would never do that to his Kohanim, right? So, but the way that the Hebrew uses Kodesh three different times was to stress just how important it was, how for the people reading it to understand that this is the holiest of all of the things that the Kohanim do is make sacrifices. That's the holiest thing that they do. And the sacrifice itself is the holiest thing presented to God. And the food itself is therefore the holiest food that God's people will eat. So there's an emphasis on holiness here. This is the only thing, be careful what you do with this food. All right. And then 23, very literally in English, indeed the curtain not he come, and to the altar not he approach, for defect in he, and not he defile sanctuaries my, for I Yahweh from holy them. And some of that should really ring a bell because you see the idiomatic nature of what was said. So it's ach, which means indeed, surely, certain. So indeed, el, which means to, in our language, ha pa rochet. That's the curtain, what they call the veil. Lo yavo, he will not come to the veil. He will not go to the veil. He will not come from the veil. Because go and come are the same thing in Hebrew. Ve'el, and to Hamis Ba'ach, the altar, which is where they make the sacrifices. Lo Yigosh. He won't even, this is a word that essentially means the same thing as bo, as our previous word. He will not come to it. He will not go to it. He will not come from it. They use a different word here, not to add emphasis, because the words are not one right after the other. The reason for a different word here that means exactly the same thing is just to break up monotony. The Jews were doing this long before people who spoke English were doing it. So anyway, he will not go to it. He will not come from it. Ki mum, that's the word for defect. Ki is because defect because he has this defect on him. And then it says bo, which is a sound-alike thing. It's not actually a word, in him, because he has the defect in him. Then it says velo yechalel. He's defiled. He's defiled by this defect. And we've already gone over the defects. You can back up a week or two if you want to go back over those again. This is et mikdashai, and that's it's actually kadosh is your root word here, but this is the way we say sanctuary, right? That's really the best English word to use is the sanctuary. Then it says Kiani Yahweh, for I am Yahweh. It says Mekadesham. So from holiness, them, their holiness comes from me, basically. So as per usual, the sages, rabbim and scholars became confused as to why the plural sanctuaries is used rather than the singular sanctuary. In biblical Hebrew, if something is alive, it is written in plural. If dead, singular. The sanctuary of God is any and all places he can be found, and where God is, there is life. Therefore, sanctuaries should always be in plural. Do what?
Skip the translation.
I did not.
Yeah.
Indeed, the curtain. I did?
Yeah.
Whoa, I skipped the translation. Whoopsie. I was like, no way. Okay, my translation. Indeed, the curtain he will not enter, and he does not draw near the altar. He will not defile my sanctuaries because of the defect in him. For I am Yahweh, from whom their holiness comes. So now we've gone from he can't draw near the fire to he can't draw near the fire, he can't draw near the curtain, and he can't go near the altar, which is where the fire is. So there's more to it now because it's been added to it. Before we got to this verse, there was only one thing. Now there's more. All right, so verse 24. And he spoke Moshe to Aharon and to sons his and to all children Yisrael. So there's a shifting of gears here. vaYidaber, and he spoke Moshe el Aharon. So Moses spoke to Aaron, ve'el, and to Banav, Aaron's sons, the Kohanim, the priests, ve'el, and to Kol B'nai Yisrael, and to all the children of Israel. So my translation, and Moshe spoke to Aharon and to his sons and to all the children of Israel. It's pretty much that simple. Our usual suspects, the sages, rabbim, and scholars, began to ask, why did Moshe tell the children of Israel the rules for the priests? Maybe it was a warning to the children not to give their sacrifices to blemished priests. While this is not a bad suggestion, it is speculative, given that a reason is not mentioned. The children of Israel agreed to obey the entire Torah. They probably need to know all of it, even the parts that do not necessarily pertain to them individually. Just throwing that out there, though speculative. All right, this completes our journey through chapter 24. So if you want to hit the recording thing.
Did you ready to start?
Yes. Okay. I want to address an issue that has been on my mind for quite some time. I have decided to call it a message to Jews who believe in Jesus and Christians who know something is wrong with Christianity from a Torah observant rabbi. Probably should have said Rob. As religion goes, when someone declares that God said, "Thus saith the Lord," blah, 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 and put whatever doctrine in there you want for blah, 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 and that which God supposedly said turns out to be wrong, a big problem arises for that person because God is never wrong. That person now has two choices: admit, "Thus saith the Lord," blah, 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 did not come from God, or spend time and effort explaining how "Thus saith the Lord," blah, 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 is actually correct regardless of the facts. Probably all of you can think of something that relates to what I just said. Early in my postgraduate days, a professor once said to me, "The advantage to being a scholar is that when we find new information, we are allowed to change our conclusions and beliefs because a scholar's statements are based purely on the known facts." To the Christians, everything I am about to say is absolutely based on documented facts. It can and will be hard for some of you to hear, as it probably will be the opposite of what you currently believe to be true. It will seem and may even be utterly anti-Christian. Please don't turn off the video or exit the live feed or scream your dissatisfaction at my words before I finish. It should not end as badly as it begins, and you may actually find that you agree with my words by the time I finish. In other words, it may not be as bad as you initially thought. With that said, there was no man named Jesus when the New Testament events took place. Thus, no man by the name of Jesus was crucified on a cross between two criminals. No one in the New Testament times was baptized in the name of Jesus. Further, no man by the name of Jesus died for the sins of anyone. So let's look at the evidence. Will you switch to the computer for me, please? We're going to look at a Hebrew name right here. This name is pronounced Yeshua. It is a Hebrew word, it is a Hebrew name, and we read Hebrew right to left. So here with this symbol in red, we get Yeh. This symbol is the SH sound in English, and you combine that with this orangey looking thing here, and you have Shu. And then this letter here, for the purpose of this particular name, has the A or sound. It is read, so this transliteration, we're using English alphabet here, is read left to right. Yeshua. Shua is how you pronounce this Hebrew name. Now, when we take this Hebrew name and we transliterate into Greek, this Y comes down all the way here, and you have to put the iota, and I forget what this thing is called here, but it makes the EI sound. So you put the two together, you get yay, yay. Then this letter here, this symbol here, the SH sound, you bring that down into the Greek, you have to put this S. This is the S in Greek. They do not have an SH sound in Greek. So it goes from Yeshu, because this thing here is the OU, ooh. It goes from Yeshua to Yesu. This is Su. You lose the H because they don't have it in Greek. Then this last letter here that represents our A, we can't do this, because if we do, this man that is currently called Jesus by Christians becomes a woman, because in Greek, if it ends in that alpha, it becomes feminine. So they take the A and they substitute that with their version of an S. You see kind of see how our S came about. You see the funky looking S there? So in Greek, his name was pronounced Jesus. Sounds a lot like Jesus. Now, you take this Jesus and transliterate it into English, the yod, the y sound, comes down here into the a sound, yay sound, but then it drops down and it got replaced with this thing called a J. We replaced the Y with a J. So J-E, jet. So we went from ye to yay to jet. Now we have the S sound because we've lost at this point the SH sound. And rather than go back to the Hebrew, they're sticking with the Greek. So we get the S sound. OU is not necessary in English. We just put the U and then we carry down the S and we get what we now think of as Jesus. Okay, keep it there. The letter J was not used in the 1611 King James Bible. The word jealousy, you're looking at the word jealousy from the 1611 King James Bible. Stop that. Notice that it starts with an I-E, L-O-U, and you see this thing that looks like an F? That's actually the S sound back in those days, I-E. So, Yelisei is how that word was actually pronounced when it was written in the King James Bible. The capital I looks like this in the King James Bible. This is not a J. It is a capital I. Capital I, not a J. So then when you look at the small J, as we would think of it, that is not a J, that is an I. For instance, if you look at the number 13 used in the King James Bible, you'll see it says X-I-I-J. These days we just put I, right? But that I, and that is an I, not a J, it is a stylized I. It's just there to look pretty. So here's a good example of another name, Joseph. That is not an I. I mean, that is not a J. That is an I. This letter right here, that is an I, not a J. J or I-O, and then this thing that looks like our F, that's an S, E-P-H. This is exactly what it looks like in the 1611 King James Bible. And it would have been pronounced Yosef, not Joseph, but Yosef. So a man by the name of, and I'm probably going to butcher the stuffing out of this, it's either Gion or Gion. I don't know if that's Giorgio or Tricino, I think is how that's pronounced. That guy, by that name, is credited with the invention and or addition of the letter J, and thus the sound associated with it in 1524. 1524 is when the J was invented. It was still not being used commonly in 1611. 1524 to 1611, people still weren't doing it. Okay, you can go back to me. So the letter J, as I said, was not used in the 1611 King James Bible. The word jealousy, I already said that. What am I doing? There never has been a J in the Hebrew or Greek language, or the sound we associate with it. When the name was finally transliterated, not from Hebrew, but from Greek, the letter J was used to make the Y or Y sound. So even when the King James Bible was translated, our modern word Jesus was pronounced Jesus. Jesus in 1611. All the way through the 17 into the 800s, it was still pronounced Jesus. Joseph was still pronounced Yosef. Anything you find with a J in your Bible today, pronounce it with a Y. There was no J, and should not be in any part of the King James Bible. Okay, in his ecclesiastical history, Eusebius made the following statement. By this means, moreover, the real antiquity and divine character of Ecclesiasticus will be equally demonstrated to those who suppose that it is recent, they suppose that it's something new, and foreign, meaning that it's never been heard of before, appearing no earlier than yesterday. Let me take my commentary out of that sentence. By this means, moreover, the real antiquity and divine character of Ecclesiasticus will be equally demonstrated by those who suppose that it is brand new and never seen before, appearing no earlier than yesterday. Any notion that Eusebius is speaking of recent events as those of time in general overlooked his words no earlier than yesterday. This statement shows that people in the early to mid 300s CE, you could think of it as 300s AD if you prefer, those people were emphatic that this not yet named religion was something new, not something old. Notice that the word church, this is supposedly the official church history. The word church is not used by Eusebius. Why? Because it did not yet exist. The word church did not exist when Eusebius was alive. Eusebius also said, and I quote, but even if we are clearly new, in other words, he just admitted that they are new, and this really fresh name of this really fresh name of Christianon, you can hear where we get the word Christian. This really fresh name of Christianon or Christian is recently known among all nations. I don't know if you can really get that. First, he says that they're clearly new. So he's admitting that even though he just said that this isn't new, now he's admitting that it is new. And this really fresh name, Christiano, which is where we get the word Christian, is recently, only recently known among all nations. Eusebius, the so-called official church historian, just admitted that not only was Catholicism a clearly new religion, but the word Christiano, where we get the word Christian, was not used to describe the followers of Yeshua until the early to mid 300s AD. With these words, Eusebius proved beyond a doubt that the followers of Yeshua were not first called Christians at Antioch. It's not even possible. Yet you find that in the New Testament translation. Yes, the word Christianon was used in the Greek text of the New Testament letters, but it was a translation of the actual word Meshihi. which means follower of the anointed one. Guess what Christiano means? Follower of the anointed one. Christiano is not what they were called. It's a translation into Greek of the word Meshihi, the word they actually were called. However, the word Christiano did not come into popular use until Eusebius's time. The Greek text was not tampered with. It was simply translated, but eventually led to the belief that Catholicism and thus Christianity existed over 300 years before their actual inception. Given that the words Christian or church and Christian did not exist until the 11 and 1200 CE, that's over 1,000 years after the New Testament letters were written, the followers of Yeshua in the first century CE could not possibly have been called Christians in Antioch. Translators wrote those words into English Bibles, not the men who wrote the New Testament. No one in the New Testament times suffered as a Christian. There were no persecutions of Christians or the church. Yeshua did not build a non-existent church on any rock. Rav, these are just the English words that we use to describe the followers of Yeshua now. Okay, why then do we not call the followers of Yeshua Muslims and their religion Islam? Oh, Rob, don't be ridiculous. The Muslims did not follow Yeshua. Islam is a completely different religion with a different God. We've already established that Christianity and thus the church did not exist during the time of the New Testament. How then can Christians follow Yeshua given that they were not there? Let that sink in a little. Further, if the Christians had somehow descended from a line of people who actually did follow Yeshua, they would have been called the Hasidim. In other words, they would have been called the saints, like they were in the New Testament letters. I will get to that later. The Catholic application of the word saint is used for precious few people who have been verified by some special group of Catholic priests who somehow managed to verify that a person to whom they gave the title had performed at least 3 miracles, among other qualifications. Their use of the word saint has never been used as a title for the congregation of the followers of Yeshua. Never. Truth is, all of the so-called anti-Nicene or early church fathers were philosophers, not religious leaders. Eusebius repeatedly complained that some of the so-called church fathers were not philosophers. The fact that they were not philosophers upset him. Technically, they were philosophers, but not trained philosophers, and thus not recognized as legitimate by Eusebius. Philosophers, not Christians, developed a new religion utilizing, in part, the Greek New Testament letters. The Latin for universal is Catholic. That's the Latin word for universal is Catholic. Thus, Catholicism was a new universal religion designed to appeal to the subjects of Constantine, developed predominantly from the works of Eusebius and Jerome. All of the feasts of God from the Jewish Bible were rejected by the new religion. The feast of the various religious sects prevalent in the 300 and 400 CE were reimagined, and the creation of a new unified religious structure and belief system emerged. The New Testament letters were written 20 to 40 years after the crucifixion. The letters that we know as the official authorized canon of the New Testament today were not suggested as the group of letters that should become the New Testament until 390 AD. Almost 300 years after the last writer of the New Testament letters died. Even then, it took another 20 or so years until the Latin Vulgate, which is the original version of the New Testament, was finally completed by Jerome. What all of this evidence means is this: the Catholic and thus Christian religions are false pagan religions that utilize the writings of legitimate Jewish rabbin to establish a new universal pagan religion with new universal pagan customs and religious doctrines and beliefs, along with an utterly made up history. If the Jewish Mashiach, the Jewish Messiah, spoken of by the Jewish Nevi'im, the Jewish prophets, has come, wouldn't his teachings and religion be Judaism? How is it possible that a Jewish Mashiach, a Jewish Messiah, came and established a new religion, given that the Nevi'im, the prophets, never spoke of a new religion? It is from the idea that Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church," in Matthew 16:18. This is, of course, a terrible translation, as the Greek text actually says, "Upon this rock I will restore my congregation." Yeshua was a Jewish Rav. We call them rabbis today, with Jewish followers, all who were members of the Jewish race and religion, all of them. His congregation was the Edah Yisrael, the congregation of Israel. Yeshua himself said, "I am not come, but to the lost sheep of the house of Yisrael." Matthew 15:21. The Nevi'im, the prophets of the Jewish Tanakh, that's the Jewish Bible, said that the Jewish Mashiach, the Jewish Messiah, would come to reestablish the Jewish covenant between God and his people. That's what it says. In Luke chapter 2, verse 25, it says that a man by the name of Shimon, they call him Simon, or Simeon, I think, was waiting on the consolation of Israel. Luke 2:25. The English word consolation comes from the Greek word paraklesin. I don't care. I know I just ruined that word, but I don't care. Which means consolation, comfort, solace. That which affords comfort or refreshment. Thus, I think this is from the Strong's Concordance. I'm not positive, but I think that's where this quote comes from, what I'm about to say. Thus, the messianic salvation, and in parentheses it goes on, so the rabbis call the Messiah the counselor, the comforter. Close parenthesis, add a period. I'm quoting from Strong's Analytic Concordance. Okay, let's look at what the Theological Dictionary says. It says, well, they really struggled with the meaning of the word. It says Judaism extols God as the only true comforter. Okay, I can agree with that for sure. They say the OT, the Old Testament, refers to various mediators of God's comfort. First, the divine word of promise. They didn't want to say the Torah, so they called it the divine word of promise, but they are talking about the Torah. Then, then it says, then the prophets, the angels, which actually should have said messengers, not angels, and the Messiah, whose time of salvation is called the consolation of God. Since the consolation of Israel, i.e., they said the resurrection, because they had no clue what they were talking about. They admit that before they ever say this, but they thought it was the resurrection. No, this is the reinstatement of the Jewish covenant with God, also known as the forgiveness of the sins of the world. That does not mean God is forgiving all Christians for all the bad things that they've done. It has nothing to do with that. That is an idiom that means God is reconciling his covenant with his people. So it's not the resurrection, it's the reinstatement of the covenant. They go on, will then be reality. They also wrote the consolation of Zion. Of course, that's based on Isaiah chapter 40, verse 1. They call it days of consolation, the year of consolation, the consolation of Jerusalem. In other words, this is not something that you don't find in the Hebrew Bible. It was common. So when the New Testament spoke of Simeon, when they brought Yeshua to be circumcised, the guy named Simeon was waiting on the consolation. He was waiting on the reconciliation of the covenant between Israel and God. And that's really what the theological dictionary is trying to say, even though they did a very poor job of doing so. To put it plainly and simply, the event that Shimon from the temple was waiting for was the appearance of the Son, could call him the servant of God. In other words, the Messiah, the Mashiach to him, who would take away the sins of the world, who would reinstate Israel's covenant with God. Hopefully you understand that's what those Jews were talking about. John chapter 1, verse 24 says, and they which were sent were Pharisees. When Yochanan Hamatibil, John the Immerser, was approached by the Pharisees, he was asked if he was Messiah, that Navi, that prophet, which means that's the man Moses said there was a man who would come that would be like him, obey him. That's what they mean when it says that prophet. Okay. Or was he Elijah? To which he responded, none of the above. I'm paraphrasing, of course. In verse 26, while still speaking to those same Pharisees, Yochanan, John, went on to say, there stands one, with a capital O, one among you. If Yochanan, John, had been singling out a specific Jewish man, he would have said, there stands one among us. Because he was a Jew, they were Jews, he would have said one among us. But he didn't. Instead, by saying there is one among you, the separation between John and those Pharisees is that John was an Essene. He was of the Essenes, and those people that he was speaking to was of the Pharisees, the Perushim, as it should be called in Hebrew. Thus, we have irrefutable New Testament evidence that Yeshua, and thus his Talmudim, his disciples, were in fact Pharisees. Dr. David Flusser was a professor emeritus at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem for many years. Was a professor of mine. He wrote that the Essenes, Sadducees, Pharisees, and the Hasidim were all Pharisaic sects. Or we could use the word denomination since we're speaking in English. It's a lot like Baptist, Catholic, Pentecostals, how they're all different sects or denominations of the Christian religion. So the Essenes, Sadducees, Pharisees, and Hasidim are all different denominations of Judaism. The New Testament letters clearly show that Yeshua and his followers were the Hasidic sect or denomination of the Pharisees. Think about how many times the New Testament letters refer to their sect as Hasidic. You may not have picked up on this fact because the English translations use the words saint or saints? Here's a few examples. 2 Corinthians 13:13 says, all the saints salute you. Acts 9:13. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard of this man from many, how much evil he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. This is before Catholicism, by the way. Acts 9:32. And it came to pass, as Kepha passed throughout the quarters, he came down also to the saints which dwelt in Lydia. Romans 1:7. And this is the one that'll make it the clearest. To all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called saints. Now, if you look at your King James Bible, it says called, and then the next two words are in italics, called to be, then it says saints. It's in italics because the Greek text does not say called to be saints. It says they are called saints. So we need only to substitute the English words saints and saints with Hasid and Hasidim to clearly see that Yeshua and his Talmudim, his followers, his 12 Shelihim, his 12 apostles, and all who believed that Yeshua was the promised Mashiach, the promised Messiah, and thus lived according to his teachings were not Christian Jews or Christians of any kind. They were all Hasidic Jews, all of them. 2 Corinthians 13:13. All the Hasidics, all the Hasidim salute you. Philippians 4:21, 22 both say the same thing. Salute every Hasid. Acts 19:13. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard of this man from many, how much evil he has done to your Hasidim in Jerusalem. Acts 9:32. And it came to pass, as Kepha passed throughout all the quarters, he came down also to the Hasidim which dwelt in Lydia. Romans 1:7. To all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called Hasidim. Would have been easier to know that that was the name of the denomination of Jews who followed Yeshua, had they have translated that properly. Okay, let's talk about the words, the word for Gentile. I'm going to go through this quickly, and then we'll get over to what I want to say to the Jews. Still trying to deal with something that I have to deal with here. After Shaul, that's the man they call Paul in the New Testament. After Shaul declared, from this point on, those are the words he actually used, from this point on, after he declared that he was going to the ethne to pronounce the Greek properly, that's the goyim. We use the word Gentile in English. After he was going to the Gentiles in Acts chapter 18, verse 6, the text never, not so much as once, says that he went to non-Jews, not one time. In fact, the text actually says that Shaul went to Jews, Jewish leaders, synagogues, and yeshivot. That's yeshiva in plural. They are not Gentile group. There are no Gentile groups mentioned, not even one. In short, Shaul did not go to the non-Jews and set up Christian churches, which of course did not exist while he was alive. Shaul did not champion a new religion. He went to places outside of Jerusalem to the Jews who were during the Second Temple period called Goyim by the Jews, Gentiles in English. First Maccabees chapter 2, verse 19. Then Mattityahu, probably know him as Matthew or something, answered and spoke with a loud voice, even if all the ethne, Gentiles, Goyim, Gentiles, that are under the king's dominion obey him, even if they all obey him and backslide was the best word I could come up with in English, because it's really fall away. All of them from Yahadut, says the religion of our fathers, literally. But even if all of them fall away from Judaism, is what he actually meant by the words that he wrote, and have given consent to his, speaking of the king's commandments, yet will I and my sons and brothers will not continue. Wait a minute, I think I read that wrong. Yet will I and my sons and my brothers
You said not, but you don't-
not doesn't go there, does it?
you don't-
Oh, it's not even there. Why am I reading not? That's why I'm getting confused. I'm putting a word in there that isn't there. Yet will I and my sons and my brothers continue to be Torah observant. What he said was walk in the covenant of our fathers. The covenant of our fathers. He's Jewish. What's the covenant of our fathers? We'll walk in Judaism. We'll walk according to the Torah. We will not obey the king's words and turn away from Judaism, from Torah observance, because he said our religion. That is our religion, Judaism. But what is that? It's Torah observance. In any way, shape, or form, he used the idiom either to the right hand or to the left. That means in any way, shape, or form in English. Mattityahu of the Maccabees was very clear in his estimation of what constituted a Yehudi, a Jew. Those who lived according to God's Torah were Yehudim, they were Jews. And those who did not were Etne, they were Goim, they were Gentiles. Non-Torah observant Jews were the Gentiles of the New Testament period. End of story. They were not non-Jews. Nothing, okay, so now I want to talk directly to the Jews. Nothing I'm about to say is anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. Nothing. There is not so much as one parable or doctrine attributed to Yeshua or any of his shelichim, any of his sent ones, his apostles, that was in violation of Torah. Not one. In fact, an equivalent to every parable and doctrine mentioned in these letters can be found in the Torah or the Nevi'im or the Ketuvim and or among the early sages. All of them. Every doctrine found in the New Testament letters is in complete harmony with the rabbinic teachings of the New Testament times. There are absolutely no contradictions to the Tanakh, that's the Hebrew Bible, the ancient rabbin, or the sages. None. The errors and contradictions arise only from the horrible translations offered by Catholic and Christian translators. Again, Christianity did not exist in the time of the New Testament writings. Translations of these letters perverted by pagan philosophers does not negate the fact that the New Testament letters are completely and utterly Jewish. There are parts of our Jewish Tanakh, our Hebrew Bible, that we are forbidden to read. Why? When Constantine, Eusebius, and Jerome decided to create a new universal religion, they took the Greek translations of the New Testament letters along with the Septuagint and translated them into Latin. In their time, only kings, aristocrats, the wealthy, and elites learned to read and speak Latin. The common people spoke Greek, but most of them couldn't even read. This approach gave the new priests, i.e., the pagan philosophers, the ability to manipulate the meaning of the texts and thus an easy way to manipulate the people. The idiomatic, not literal thinking process, the grammar rules, the history, customs, culture, idiomatic dialect, and even the meanings of Hebrew words from the Hebrew Bible have had the same effect on modern Jews. Modern Jewish thinking, culture, and dialect is to modern Jews what the Latin Vulgate was to the Catholics, a book that almost none of them could understand. A religion used to manipulate its followers to a desired end, established by the few who know how to make the book say whatever they want it to say. To those Jews who read the forbidden passages and then read the New Testament letters, please, please listen to what I'm about to say. If Yeshua was not the promised Mashiach, then the Navi, the prophets, in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, especially Daniel and Yirmiyahu, that's Jeremiah, they were all false Nevi'im. They were all false prophets, if in fact Yeshua was not Mashiach. Daniel and Yirmiyahu both gave us the exact time that Mashiach would come. That time was the period we now call the first century CE. If Yeshua is not Mashiach, someone else was. Otherwise, every prophet who wrote about Messiah is a false prophet, and it's time to burn our scrolls. Once you've read what the Nevi'im, the prophet, said would happen to Mashiach, and then read the New Testament, you know Yeshua was exactly who his followers and the Nevi'im said he was. He was the physical image of the invisible God. However, God does not change. He did not start Christianity. Do not follow Christian doctrine. Do not forsake the foundation of the synagogue. Epi synagogein, as it is written in the Greek text in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. The Nevi'im, the prophets, and the New Testament letters tell us the Jewish leaders would reject Mashiach. They did. The Mashiach would appear in the first century CE. He did. The Mashiach would suffer and die. He did. The Heichal, the temple, would be destroyed. It was. The leaders of the Heichal would be killed, escape, or be enslaved. They were. The Yerushalayim, or Yerushalam, as it's called in biblical Hebrew, would be plowed under. It was. But nowhere do the Nevi'im, the prophets, ever say that God would reject his people or his law. Nowhere. Nowhere do the Nevi'im, nowhere do the prophets ever say that God would start a new secondary religion. The New Testament letters are a collection of Jewish letters written by Jewish rabbim to other Jewish rabbim concerning matters of the Jewish, not Christian, religion. Anything that you read in the New Testament letters that is in contradiction and or violation of the Torah should scream out at you that the translation is wrong or your understanding of the law is wrong. In short, the New Testament letters are in agreement with the Hebrew Bible. Any discrepancy is on you to seek out. In the end, the only thing different in the teachings of the New Testament letters, when translated correctly, is that Mashiach, speaking of, God in human flesh, that he has come. That's different. Because before, we were waiting for him to come. The New Testament letters verify that he did. He has made the sacrifices for the sins of the Jews. I cannot turn this off. hold on. I'm tethered. I almost made it. So let me finish up. Now I have to figure out where I was. In the end, the only thing different in the teachings of the New Testament letters, when translated correctly, of course, is that Mashiach, God in the flesh, has come. He has made the sacrifice for the sins of the Jews, and thus all Jews are to return to complete and utter Torah observance. Not observance of all things Jewish, Torah observance. Especially since the vast majority of what we Jews know today as Judaism comes from the Dark Ages. As written by sages and rabbim, most of whom had never been to the land of Israel, most of whom spoke Aramaic or Arabic, but did not speak the Hebrew language. This means that Judaism of today is vastly different from biblical Judaism. Modern Judaism would be unrecognizable to biblical Jews. I am not against observance of anything Mishnaic or Talmudic, unless and until it is in violation of the Hebrew Bible, which much of it, of course, is, especially the Talmudic writings. So do not follow Christian doctrine. Do not fellowship with Christians in their pagan temples. It's forbidden by God's law. There is only one God. He has never fathered a child with a human. God placed himself in a virgin woman, and thus God was the promised son, the promised servant, the promised Mashiach. Just like he said, I am God. Well, he said his name. And other than me, there is no salvation. That ought to make this pretty clear. The one he is the child. God is the child. He didn't have a child. He is the child who would be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, Isaiah 9:6. Yeah, that's God, not God's Son, because it would have said the Son of God, the Son of the Everlasting Father, the Son of the Prince of Peace. It doesn't say that, does it? I've spent the past 20 years of my life researching and translating the New Testament letters from a biblical Hebrew point of view. I hope to have the first volume, which is Matthew through the Acts, it's first 5 books, ready for the printer by the end of this year. But I've had that hope for several years now. Just keep finding more. So what can a Jew do in the meantime? You could listen to and or interact with me personally, but you don't know me. You don't know if I'm worth listening to. So what you can do on your own is pick up Umberto Cassuto's commentaries on Genesis and Exodus, another professor at the Hebrew University. Find everything he says about the grammar rules of ancient Mesopotamia and learn them by heart. There's really not that many rules. Hopefully, I will have something maybe online that will cover the grammar rules not covered by Cassuto, because he did miss, I don't know, 4 or 5. Then, and only then, after you've learned these rules, you should go back and read the Torah. Once you have done so, read the prophets, especially that which is forbidden. Then and only then, go back to the New Testament letters and read in light of ancient Judaism. You should have a fairly good foundation on which to build your Jewish understanding of living in covenant with our God. One last word to the Christians. If you are a Christian and are sincerely thinking about following the Jewish religion of Yeshua and his followers, you can DM me and I will try to help point you in the right direction. Your options are very limited, and no, so-called Messianic Jews do not have the answer you seek. At least, not yet. Shalom.
The blessing, Be'ivrit. Yavarecha Yahweh beyish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha vihunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.